Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jeff. Welcome to my little talk this evening about the importance of the U.S. election to the world. I said my name is Jeff. I want to thank management and staff of JBKM TV for hosting me this evening. And I'm going to give you my take on how I see the U.S. elections, especially this elections, affecting the rest of the world. Some of you may have seen my videos that I've put up on my Facebook page, and you would have known that I cover a host of topics that I consider to be of importance to my community and more so the broader community here in Canada and in the United States. The American election that is afoot right now is going to be the most consequential election, not only for the United States, but for Canada, Mexico, and the rest of the world. Therefore, I think it's imperative that we make ourselves aware of the goings-on in the United States of America. There have been some troubling revelations that have come to light recently in these elections, and I think it doesn't bode well for the rest of us. You know, growing up, I used to hear all the time people say, when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. Well, America is sneezing right now, and the whole world is feeling the effects of that cold. I live in Canada. We are close partners with the United States in trade and in commerce. Or industries overlap each other. So whatever happens in the United States directly affects us here in Canada. The recent incidences in America with respect to law enforcement has a chilling effect, not only in the United States, but also here in Canada. Because whatever happens south of our border eventually occurs here. And my concern is that the chaos that is engulfing the U.S. right now has the potential to seep over our borders. And it's really concerning to me and to a lot of people that I've been talking with, especially people in the black community. Now, we have our own issues here. And I know that I've been told a number of times that I should tackle issues here in Canada. And I do from time to time. But I think the most consequential event in this time is what's going on in the U.S. You know, I've watched U.S. politics for years. I've followed it. I'm a young man. I've always been interested in politics, world politics, and especially the politics of the U.S. In 1992, I remember I was in Barbados when then President Clinton visited Barbados for a CARICOM Heads of Government Summit. And I want to discuss how what happens in America affects everybody. During that visit President Clinton made to the Caribbean, he'd made a host of promises to the heads of CARICOM. At the time, Barbados, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, to a lesser extent Trinidad, were banana exporters. Their main export, especially the smaller islands, was banana. And those countries had had preferential treatment both to the European Union and to the US for the export of the bananas. So it was top of mind for the leaders of those countries to discuss the export of bananas to especially America with the then President of the United States. I can remember that he promised those leaders that he would renew the preferential treatment they had for the importation of their bananas to America. When that summit was done, President Clinton went back to America and did not do what he promised the Caribbean leaders he was going to do. And the subsequent events that followed him not acting was the decimation of the banana industry in the Caribbean. And you may ask, why do I go back all the way to an incident that occurred in 1992? The reason I do that is because history has a way of repeating itself. Yesterday, the Secretary of State of the United States, Mr. Mike Pompeo, visited my country, the country of my birth. And the reason for his visit was to garner support for Caribbean and Central American countries to assist the United States in their ongoing feud with our neighbor to our south, Venezuela. So Mr. Pompeo was in Suriname, where he met with the Surinamese government. And let me back up a little. Both the governments in Suriname and the governments in Guyana are new governments. They are less than 6 months on the job. So both governments are new governments. The government of Guyana in particular, the new government, was installed based on the interference of said Secretary of State. And the reason for him wanting to interfere in the elections in Guyana was exactly why he was there yesterday. You see, we had a government prior that Pompeo and the rest of them tried to get on board with interfering in the affairs of Venezuela, and they were rebuffed. You know, America doesn't take lightly to being rebuffed. So they retaliated, and they created havoc in the Guyanese election process, and by so doing, installed a government that was not legitimately elected by the Guyanese people. It is ironic that Mr. Pompeo and his administration would go to Guyana to tout their prowess in fostering democratic processes in the world when Mr. Pompeo was visiting a country that he personally interfered in the electoral process. And they are trying to go after a country that they didn't like the result of the elections in that country. The fear that I have for my people and, by extension, the rest of the Caribbean and the world, is that America will draw Guyana and Suriname into an armed conflict with Venezuela. a conflict that is guaranteed to see the deaths of hundreds of Guyanese, if not thousands, and the destruction of the fragile infrastructure that we now have in Guyana. And judging by America's record, when they are done destroying Guyana, and if they achieve their goal in toppling President Maduro in Venezuela, they are just going to pack up and leave Guyana to clean up the mess they created, just like they have done the world over. You see, America has the resources and the political and the economic power to influence smaller countries. And they use that influence to their advantage. But what the leaders of a lot of these countries are either unaware of or uncaring of is the damage that is done once America has come in and toppled legitimate governments, create civil unrest between the peoples of those countries, and then they just leave. A recent example of that is what they did in Syria to the Kurds. The United States was in a battle with the Syrian government. And at the same time, they were fighting ISIS. The Kurds fought alongside the Americans, died alongside the Americans. And what did they get for so doing? America just decided, we're out, and up and left the Kurds to deal with the aftermath of them supporting America. That's exactly what America is going to do to Suriname and Guyana. Once the Americans have achieved the goal they intend to achieve in Venezuela, they are just going to leave those countries with the chaos they created, the deaths that inevitably will occur once a war breaks out. And then a poor country like Guyana will be left to pick up the broken pieces. Iraq. America went into Iraq, and we know how that turned out. So I would like to talk to both President Trump and his political rival, Mr. Joe Biden. Gentlemen, our country can ill afford any form of destruction. Please, on behalf of the people of Guyana, I am imploring you to use whatever diplomatic means you have at your disposal to avoid an armed conflict with Venezuela. I know that President Trump boasts about the power of the U.S. military. And there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that America has the wherewithal militarily to take on the Venezuelan army. Here's the problem. Russia, China, and Turkey have sent military equipment and military attaches to Venezuela. This is no secret. The Russians made no secret about sending a message that their military is in Venezuela. They flew those bombers into Caracas in the middle of the day. They didn't do it by stealth. They didn't do it by night. They didn't do it under the cloak or the disguise of anything. They flew those bombers into Caracas to send a message. So, even though, Mr. President, your military can overwhelm the Venezuelan military, I have no doubt. Think of the involvement of the aforementioned countries in an armed conflict in our country. My people have nowhere to hide. My people have nowhere to go. We are surrounded on our coast by sea defenses, dikes that prevent the Atlantic Ocean from overwhelming our coastline. It will only take a few munitions to destroy those dikes. And then the lifeblood of my country, Mr. President, would be snuffed out in the blink of an eye. We have no other means of protecting ourselves from the mighty Atlantic Ocean other than those barriers. And I can guarantee that if a conflict, an armed conflict ensues between America and Venezuela, and using Guyana as a launching pad, that the Venezuelans will strike our coastline. I know that Mr. Pompeo signed with the Guyana government yesterday a treaty, a joint venture treaty to peruse the waters off of the northern coast of Guyana. That is no solace to my fellow Guyanese, because we have hundreds of miles of coastline with the Atlantic Ocean. And any breach of the defenses on those coastlines would render our coasts inhabitable. Mr. President, 90% of the population of Guyana live along those coastlines. If the Venezuelan military or their supporters breach those barriers, my country is done. Thousands would die, livestock would die, or farming industry would be decimated. And you can see what the effects of that would be on a small country like ours. Mr. Vice President, I would like you to address this issue with the President of the United States. That's Mr. Joe Biden. Please, we in Guyana cannot afford to have our soil used as a launching pad for a proxy war with Venezuela. So I'm imploring you to please seek every diplomatic avenue to ensure that an armed conflict does not ensue in my country. And as I'm on the topic of destruction, I would like to talk about climate change. I know, Mr. President, that you do not believe in climate change. I've heard you say several times it's a hoax. It's a hoax by the world community. It's a hoax by the Chinese government. It's a hoax by every international body against the United States. Mr. President, my country is 6 feet below sea level. The coastline, like I just mentioned, of my country is protected from the Atlantic Ocean because our coastline is 6 feet below sea level. Climate change is threatening our very existence. At the times now when there is high tide, the Atlantic Ocean overruns the protections that we have from that ocean. Because of rising sea levels, our coastline is gradually becoming uninhabitable. I know that a lot of times it seems as though America is the center of the world. And if it doesn't happen in America, it's not happening. That's not true. Mr. President, the rainforest. We share the Amazon with Brazil, Venezuela, Suriname. It's called the Amazon rainforest. And the reason it is called the rainforest is because it's in the name. It rains in the forest. The Amazon is on fire. Millions of kilometers of rainforest have been destroyed by fire. When the rainforest, think of this, when the rainforest is on fire, how can anybody in their right minds still say that there's no problem with climate change? This is not dry land. This is not dry forest. This is the rainforest. And the rainforest is on fire. If the rainforest is on fire, what prevents any other forest anywhere from suffering the same fate due to the rising temperatures and the lack of precipitation in several parts of the world? As we speak, the entire western coast of the United States is burning. Just last year, thousands of kilometers of forests was destroyed in Australia. And you know, I've heard people say, well, the trees grow back after a period. That's true. Trees are going to regrow. But you know what doesn't grow back? The millions of birds and animals and insects reptiles, all of the life form that sustain the ecosystem is being made extinct by these fires. When these fires burn, they are not only burning the trees, they are burning the habitats of millions of life form that inhabit those forests and jungles. So when a fire ravages the rainforest, the world is in danger because the entire ecosystem is destroyed. And then, after the fires are out and the rains come, all the toxic ash from those burnt animals and reptiles and insects and trees and shrubs and flowers and bees, or life support bees, are burned, killed by the billions. And then all of that toxic brew is then washed into our waterways. Guyana is a land of many waters. That's our motto. That's what we're known for. But here's what's happening. Those fires and the ensuing rains and storms that result from the smoke and the heat then wash all of the toxic brew and debris into our waterways. Our waterways is where we get our potable water from. So the compounding of the problems of climate change is far-reaching. Other than fires and storms and hurricanes and tornadoes, the human cost of climate change is increasing exponentially. The disease that come with our animals and our livestock having to drink contaminated water. In parts of my country, the rivers and the lakes are where the inhabitants of those communities get their water. They have no other means of obtaining water. And when all of that toxic slush is washed into our riverways, our children are dying. Our elders are suffering with debilitating diseases. We're in trouble. Please, Mr. Biden, Mr. Trump, please take the threat of climate change seriously. This is not an American problem only. That's why it's called global climate change. It's not American climate change or Canadian climate change. It's the global climate change. And it's having devastating effects on small countries like mine. We are a farming country. In addition to our exports of bauxite and gold and timber, agriculture is the lifeblood of my country. And what is happening now is that when it's hot, it's fire hot. And then when the rain comes, it's torrential rains. So the climate is destroying our agriculture, or rice industry, or sugar industry, or cash crop industry. All of it is suffering because of the effects of climate change. And if nothing is done to mitigate the damage that is being caused by this phenomenon of climate change, together with your forthcoming war, my country may cease to exist. I'm begging on behalf of my brothers and sisters to please, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President Biden, please take this seriously and work to mitigate the damages that is being caused in our hemisphere. I'll be back to continue this discussion. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you all for listening. We're going to go to a commercial break. We'll be back in a few.
Do you know who you are? What is your name?
Sometimes you wonder why and wonder how. Don't be alarmed, just stay calm, cause even if you choose or not to.
My child, recite the words of this ancient mythology. The wisdom I disperse in this verse, no apology. Memorize to keep you from evil theology. For you, the dark Ahuya denied your equality. See, for generations we perpetrated psychology. Divide and conquer each other, really lynch policy. You cannot build each other up, how will you build economy?
Welcome back. Thank you for joining me. Those of you now tuning in, I'm Jeff, and this evening I'm discussing the importance of the American election on the world. The importance of America to the world cannot be understated. America has been the beacon of light and of hope to the world. But I just read a Pew survey where America has lost its savor, its salt, its light. Never before in my lifetime have I seen America at this low a level of approval anywhere in the world. I live in Canada. There was a survey, a poll conducted. The results came out last week. 79% of Canadians have an unfavorable rating for the US. And we are your closest neighbors. We are your greatest trading partners. We share similar cultures. We share the same continent. And as your closest neighbors, you have an abysmal approval rating with Canadians. In Germany, you have an 11% approval rating. In Britain, I think it's like 16%. You know, I listened to a debate between President Trump's former chief strategist, Mr. Steve Bannon, and Mr. Bernie Sanders. They came here, Canada, and they engaged in the monk debates. And I listened to Mr. Bannon talk about populism. And his contention was that populism, especially right-wing populism, is the way of the world in the 21st century. I couldn't disagree more. Populism, especially right-wing populism, has been a destructive force in the world. You see, populism has its genesis in xenophobia and bigotry, racism and hatred. Right-wing populism is toxic. If you want proof of that, look at what's going on in the United States right now. We have a populist president who believes that it should be America first. I have no problem with that. But when it becomes America only, or America first to the exclusion of everybody else, the world is in problem. The world is in turmoil. Brexit. The UK embarked on their Brexit. It has made a mess of the UK. As we speak, they still haven't been able to negotiate a separation agreement from the European Union. And when this situation that we are in, with this COVID-19, is finally over, and the world resumes normalcy and trading again, Britain is going to find itself in a very precarious position because of Brexit. America too. You know, a month ago, President Trump visited a manufacturing facility in Wisconsin. And while at that facility, he just announced that he was going to put a 10% tariff on Canadian aluminum. Just like that. Just a few weeks before that, President Trump was boasting that he was able to renegotiate NAFTA, which is now named the USMCA, which is the US, Mexico, Canada, America agreement. He was boasting that he was able to renegotiate NAFTA for a better deal for the Americans. How can the world trust anything America says when you negotiate a deal with the President of the United States and on a whim the President decides he is going to ignore the fact that he has a negotiated deal with Canada and impose a 10% tariff on our aluminum? That's the breakdown of the normal course of conducting business with the US right now. That happened, that institution of the tariff happened 5-6 weeks ago. Then all of a sudden, last week, quietly, he announced that he was withdrawing the tariff. And I can guarantee you that the reason he imposed the tariff was because he wanted to impress the Wisconsinites that he's this tough guy. And so that he can look strong for his re-election. But by the same token, the reason he rescinded the tariff is for the very same reason he imposed the tariff. So we have this Jekyll and Hyde personality that we have to deal with. Because I can guarantee you that the beer industry and the soft drink industry and other industries that use aluminum for canning their products went to the president through their representatives and said, this is hurting our industry. So he imposed the tariffs to impress one manufacturing industry. And then he quietly had to rescind the tariffs because of another manufacturing industry. And that's the kind of uncertainty that the world has to deal with the current occupant of the White House. You know, I've heard the president complain over and over again about migrants showing up at the southern border. But I've heard complaints, I've heard what the solution should be internally in America to deal with the migrants. What I haven't heard from this administration is how to deal with the issues that are presenting these migrants at the border. See, there was a time when the United States spent its dollars to help others. USAID was a department in the United States government that rendered assistance to poorer countries around the world. This president has significantly cut the funding to USAID and other charitable U.S. organizations. So what's happening is that people can no longer afford to live in their home countries. And all they see is that they probably can make a better living in the U.S. So they are risking life and limb to get to the U.S. See, my advice to the president or to Mr. Biden would be to reinstitute the assistance that you afforded these poorer countries. But not only that, America is the greatest nation on earth with some of the smartest minds in all industries, technology, agriculture, you name it. America has it. Instead of trying to foster animus with these countries, why not extend an olive branch? Why not send qualified people to train the citizens of these countries, to improve their agricultural industries, to improve their manufacturing industries? Rather than sending billions of dollars to China, why doesn't America invest in the hemisphere that's closest to them? If they say a rising tide lifts all boats, if the United States were to invest capital in places like Central America and South America, the problem they have at their southern border would significantly reduce. And how the political class in America can't see this is beyond me. You know, the administration presently in office in America have complained about the Mexicans crossing the southern border. Nobody ever discussed why the Mexicans started crossing the southern border in the numbers that they do. Well, let me give you a little hint. In the 90s, when Bill Clinton negotiated NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, it put large Mexican farms out of business. The same thing President Clinton did to the banana industry in the Caribbean is the same thing he did to the agriculture industry in Mexico. The bordering communities that border the United States and Mexico were huge farming communities. So they farmed and produced billions of dollars worth of agriculture and shipped it to America. When Bill Clinton signed the North American Free Trade Agreement, what they did was they said to the Mexicans, okay, let's take corn for instance. Mexicans were producing corn. Ohio was producing corn. The North American Free Trade Agreement said both countries will be able to sell their corn at the same price. Tariff-free, import duty-free. Mexicans agreed to that. Now, these were industries that employed thousands, if not millions, of Mexicans. So the Mexicans agreed. We will produce our corn, we will sell our corn across the border to the U.S. But here's how the U.S. undercut the Mexican farmers. The U.S. then set up a system to subsidize the corn and grain farmers in the Midwestern U.S. So the Mexicans, when they thought that they had signed an agreement to sell their corn and other agricultural products into America at a negotiated price based on the North American Free Trade Agreement, they could no longer compete because then the grain farmers in America could dump the grain on the market for next to nothing because the American government was subsidizing the farming community in America at the expense of the farmers in Mexico. So when the farms started closing because they could no longer compete with American farmers, the Mexicans started crossing the border to work on the farms in America. And there is where the problem started. Nobody wants to talk about how the problem started. They just want to talk about the problem. So the influx of Mexicans into America looking for work was as a direct result of the North American Free Trade Agreement. You know, I was on a training program in 1992, and I met a Mexican military officer. and he was in charge of the northern border between Mexico and the United States. So it would be the southern border of the United States and northern border of Mexico. He had gone to America for training. He had gone to America on exchange military programs with the U.S. for years. And then he wanted to take his family to Disneyland. So he applied for visas for him, his wife, and his 3 kids to go to Disney World. And the Mexican and the U.S. Embassy in Mexico denied his visa. This is a man who would put himself literally on the front line between Mexico and the U.S. because he commanded the Mexican military on the U.S. border. He'd gone to America several times at the invitation of the U.S. Then when he wanted to take his kids on a vacation, he said he hadn't taken a vacation in 7 years because they were fighting the narco trade between Mexico and the U.S. So for 7 years, he commanded the Mexican military on the border with the U.S. fighting the drug cartels. And when he wanted to take a vacation to get his family to go to America for a little respite, the American embassy denied his visa. And he told me he went back to his command center and told all the military personnel under him not to intercept anything crossing the Mexican border into the U.S. And there is where the huge drug problem erupted between Mexico and the U.S. What the U.S. does not realize is that every action has an equal and corresponding reaction. And if you unfear others, others will unfear you. Which brings me to my next point. The chaos that is now engulfing United States elections. For decades, the U.S. has gone around the world and manipulated elections, toppled duly elected governments to install governments that they wanted. I can remember President Bush. He was the man who was going to spread democracy around the world. He forced the Palestinians into an election that they didn't want. But America wanted to show that they were the bastion of democracy and they were going to share democracy to the rest of the world. So they forced the Palestinians to have an election. They wanted one person elected as president of the Palestinian Authority. And guess what? The Palestinians elected Hamas, the sworn enemy of the United States. In a democratic election, the Palestinians elected the people America didn't want. And then they were left now to deal with a hostile force because they wanted to interfere. Iraq, same thing. They got rid of Saddam. And who do they have now? What did they get? ISIS. Now, Iraq was sworn enemies with Iran. And because of American interference, Iran and Iraq are basically now the same country. Just in March, they went to my country and created so much havoc in the electoral process that now my country is in turmoil and uproar. And what did America want from creating that kind of instability? One, we have the second largest oil reserve in the world. And two, America wanted to put a military base in my country. So for that reason, they went in, created havoc in the electoral process so that they can install a government of their choice, not a government of the Guyanese choice. They wanted a government of their choice, a government that they can manipulate, a government that they can command and demand stuff from. This is the first time in the history of my country that a United States Secretary of State has visited my country. And this is no accident. This didn't happen because some or the other America has become this altruistic society and country that now they want to participate in the rebuilding of my country. No. They want war. They want oil. And the reason they want to go after Venezuela is because, like in my earlier comments, I said we are 6 feet below sea level. We are higher than Venezuela. Venezuela has oil reserves. Because we are lower than Venezuela, when they tap in to the reserves in Guyana, because these oil wells are pretty much linked on the ground, they can now drain oil from other basins around. So if they can conquer Venezuela and put a government in Venezuela like they did in Guyana, you see what their intention is. The oil. They want to have control of the oil in that part of the world. So that's why they created all the troubles. But America can solve a lot of its problems if it stops creating a lot of its problems. Why don't America decide to use diplomacy, to use the economic strength and wealth to benefit people in that part of the world? Rather than setting up a military base in Guyana, why doesn't America go there and set up a manufacturing base? The billions that they're going to spend to build that base, to stock that base, to have personnel on that base, to create strife with our neighbors, they can use that same wealth to build up a manufacturing base in Guyana. In that way, we don't have to go to war. We don't have to worry about our infrastructure being decimated by munitions should a shooting war ensue between Guyana and Venezuela. And we can have a better atmosphere to live in. So my friends, we can have a better world if the United States of America would just change their strategy from war to commerce. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for tuning in. It's been my pleasure to be with you this evening. I'll do this again. I'll let you know when. Thank you. God bless.
Do you know who you are? What is your name?
Sometimes you wonder why and wonder how. Don't be alarmed, just stay calm, cause even if you choose or not to.
My child, recite the words of this ancient mythology. The wisdom I disperse in this verse, no apology. Memorize to keep you from evil theology. For you, the darker hue, you denied your equality. See, for generations we perpetrated psychology. Divide and conquer each other, really lynch policy. You cannot build each other up, how will you build equality?